Good evening, chess fans around the world. This is Victor Rosas, USCF expert, and today I'm going to bring you one of my own games on the martial attack in the Ruy Lopez. The game starts e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, castles, c3, d5. Now this is the main position in the martial attack after 8 d5. In this position, white has a few options. He can play d4, he can play e takes d5, which is what I played. And this type of positions as black have been played by very strong grandmasters such as Peter Leko and Grandmaster Anand, for example. Knight takes d5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, rook takes e5, c6. Now also in this position, white can actually play either d4, d3, or possibly even g3, h3. In this game I went with 12, d3. Bishop d6, rook e1, queen h4, g3, queen h3. And now this is actually a very typical position. There are many games played in this line, and I actually studied one of games of Grandmaster Peter Leko, and I really like this rook e4 move. I thought it was a pretty interesting move, counter-attacking move. And here in this position, my opponent has a few moves. He can play bishop d7, he can play queen f5, which is the most common move, or he can play knight f6, which is what he played. In this position, usually in the main lines, when the pawn is on d4, he would have been able to play g5. But in this position it doesn't work, because after bishop takes g5, queen f5, the rook in e4 and the bishop in g5 are not hanging, because the rook in e4 is being protected by the pawn on d3. Now if the pawn was in d4, they both would be hanging and white would actually lose a piece. But that's not the situation in this game. Knight f6, rook h4. Immediately counter-attacking. Now possibly I have ideas like queen h5 later on, pressuring on h7, queen f5, and here I decided to play knight d2. The reason is that my opponent cannot take the pawn on d3, because after rook d4, he loses the bishop on d6. Typically I've seen in these positions that g5 is being played, and here I was expecting to play rook h6, knight g4, and after knight e4 I was going to give up the exchange. But in this position, actually I believe that white has compensation. White is, I believe the position right now is equal. Knight d2, and my opponent did not play g5 actually, which I was expecting. He played rook e8. And now the position is a little uncommon, we'll just say. The rook belongs to e8, but I believe not just yet, not immediately to rook e8. Here I play bishop c2, repositioning my bishop, and now I'm going to open up the diagonal after d4. And here in this position, my opponent believes he could possibly trap my rook after g5. I play d4, and now I was expecting him to play queen d5, after which I believe the position should be equal. He played queen e6, and after queen e6 I played this very interesting move, rook to h6. It took me about actually a half hour to play rook h6, because it's actually complicated. It's a complicated position, and there are a few lines actually to calculate. The first one I calculated was that after queen e1, check, black loses. Black loses to queen takes e1, rook takes e1 check, king g2, and now king g7. Okay, it immediately seems like my rook on h6 is trapped. But I saw this move, rook takes f6, king takes f6, knight e4 check, hitting the bishop on d6, king e6, and after knight takes d6, king takes d6, bishop f4, recovering my rook on e1. And now in this position, White is much better. The pawn on h7 is weak, the pawn on f7 is weak, and I believe white should be absolutely winning in this position. There is a threat of possibly playing rook e8 even, or rook e5 to h5. White is just absolutely better. So after rook h6, the next move I calculated was king to g7. And after king to g7, it seems again as my rook is trapped on h6. But it is not. In this position, knight to e4, a very good move. After knight e4, for example, king takes h6, bishop takes g5 check, king g7, knight takes f6, and I'm going to follow it up with queen h5 with an attack. And I believe here white is winning. So after rook h6, I had to calculate a last move, and it was bishop f8. Now after bishop f8, it seems like my rook on h6 really has no squares to go to now, and I might just have to give up an exchange and play on from there. But in this position, I calculated an excellent move, and you can pause this video and you can try to figure it out yourself. Okay, the move in the game is bishop takes h7 check. The knight on f6 is pinned, so he cannot take the bishop on h7. And after king g7, you can pause the video again and try to figure out the next move. The move is knight e4. Knight e4. The rook on h6 is hanging. The knight on e4 is hanging. Possibly the bishop on g7 and h7 is hanging. But yet knight e4, and white has a tremendous attack on the black king. My opponent played king takes h6. Bishop takes g5 check, king takes h7, knight takes f6 check, king g7, queen h5, threatening checkmate on h7. Here in this position, my opponent was forced to give up the queen. Queen takes f6, bishop takes f6, king takes f6, and now I have a queen and a rook against two bishops and two rooks. But the advantage of my position is actually that I have a pass pawn on the h file. And actually my opponent's pieces are not developed. That's the most important advantage I have. Queen f3, king g7, queen takes c6, I grab another pawn, and now it's just a matter of technique. Bishop h3, queen f3, bishop d6. Now if I play g4 trapping the bishop, my opponent can possibly play rook h8 and possibly have some pressure against the h2 pawn. And I didn't want to allow that. Here I found a very good move, queen h5, attacking the bishop on d7. And if, for example, black plays rook h8, I can play queen g5 check, king f8, and after queen f6, he has two pieces hanging, he has to resign. Here in this position, queen h5, my opponent played bishop d7, but after queen g5, king h7, queen f6, bishop e6, protecting the bishop on d6 and protecting the pawn on f7, d5, a very good move, bishop e7, queen f3, and now the bishop on e6 is hanging, and the pawn on f7 is unprotected. He has to play bishop d7, but after queen takes f7, king h6, d6 immediately wins the game for white. Both the bishop on d7 and the bishop on e7 are unguarded. After bishop takes d6, queen takes d7, rook a d8, queen h3 check, king g7, queen g4, king h7, queen f5 check, king g7, and after rook d1, my opponent actually resigned after a couple of moves because I had the idea to play rook d4 and g4. Okay, thank you very much.